Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session of Target Prelims 2023, which is going to be the second session of Environment and Ecology, where we shall be taking up the questions relevant for the portion of current affairs for the past year and few of the areas of protected areas and national parks and wildlife sanctuaries as well as biosphere reserves. That is also something and one of the areas that we are going to deal with today. So without further ado, let us initiate the discussion for the questions. So we start with the first question of the day, and that is about bond challenge. Now, bond challenge is associated with A, conservation of migratory species, restoration of coastal ecosystem, reclamation of degraded land, and limiting the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere. So what is it that bond challenge is associated with? Now here, please don't get confused between the bond convention and the bond challenge. Both of them are very, very different. So here, when we talk about bond challenge, it is about reclamation of degraded land. That is option C is going to be the correct answer in this case. Here, please understand that when we talk about bond convention, that is very, very different. Bond convention deals with the conservation of migratory species, protecting those areas where the species are migrating from one region to another. That is included in bond convention. But bond challenge, that is initiated by the German government. And here, as per this challenge, it is a global goal to bring around 150 million hectares of degraded land and deforested landscape into restoration by 2020 and around 350 million hectares by 2030. So that is about reclamation of the degraded land. How do you reclaim the degraded land? By bringing it under vegetation of some sort or the other, bringing it under vegetation by ensuring that the amount of pollution which is happening, that is removed in an area, and thereby the land is productive again. Now here, please understand that land degradation is a complex phenomena. But in a simplistic term, if you have to understand it, land degradation is, in simplest terms, those kind of land areas where the productivity has reduced to zero. So you don't have any productivity happening in those areas. They are unable to support the plant life, and thereby the faunal community also don't come into that area. Now here, what is important for you to notice that which are the agencies or the organizations and the bodies which are involved in launching this bond challenge. So here, Government of Germany and IUCN. Right? So IUCN is one of the important organizations which have launched this. Now this bond challenge also coincides or dovetails into the strategy of UNCCD. Now UNCCD is what? Convention to Combat Desertification. Convention to Combat Desertification. As we looked at it yesterday, this was also arrived at the Rio Summit or the Earth Summit held in Rio in 1992. Now here, UNCCD had launched the goal of land degradation neutrality, LDN, or land degradation neutrality. And this is something which has been further highlighted during the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, which was a part of the Conference of Parties 15 of CBD. There also land degradation neutrality was talked about. What is this concept of degradation neutrality? That basically means that every year, let's suppose, you have 50 hectares or 100 hectares of land which goes as a wasteland. Now, simultaneously, every year you have to ensure that some or the other area is also reclaimed. So for any country, let's suppose a country like India, every year, let's suppose we experience that 100 hectares. Just as an example, let's suppose that 100 hectares of land gets degraded. Now, in order to achieve neutrality, land degradation neutrality, you will have to ensure the reclamation of 100 hectares either in that area itself or somewhere else. So that helps you meet the goal set by UNCCD as well. That is why Bond Challenge coincides and dovetails with the approach of UNCCD. Now, I hope majority of you would have given the correct answer in this case. Now moving on to the next question. Consider the following statements about global methane emissions. Methane takes a longer time to dissipate in the atmosphere as compared to carbon dioxide. Second, warming effect per molecule of methane is higher than that of carbon dioxide. Now here we have to find out which of the statements are correct. So when we take a look at the first statement, it takes a longer time to dissipate in the atmosphere as compared to carbon dioxide. This is going to be incorrect. Because when we talk about methane, as we will take a look at it shortly, methane is one of those short-lived climate pollutants, as it is referred to as SLCP. Along with black carbon, ozone, etc. This is an SLCP, short-lived climate pollutant. So that is why it dissipates very naturally and very quickly in the atmosphere. And it stays for a much shorter duration in the atmosphere as compared to carbon dioxide. So how does methane dissipate or dissociate in the region of atmosphere? So in the atmosphere, it ends up reacting with the hydroxyl ions and ends up producing CO2 plus H2O. So that is one of the outcomes when the methane reacts. So that is why it is able to react with hydroxyl ions which are found in abundance, especially in the lower levels of atmosphere, and that is where it dissociates. Warming effect per molecule of methane is higher than carbon dioxide. This is going to be the correct statement. So here the correct answer is going to be B, that is 2 only. Now here you have to understand, methane per molecule has got a greater heating ability, greater retention of heat as a greenhouse gas. That is why after carbon dioxide, it is said to be one of the most destructive contaminants in the atmosphere in the context of global warming. And here you also have to understand the related concept of the aspect of radiative forcing. This can also be understood in the aspect of methane emissions and the other emissions. So when you have the normal heating and cooling of the planet receives heat during the day, ends up losing that heat during the night time, and there is a maintenance in terms of the heat budget of the planet. But you have certain elements, certain weather phenomena, certain climatic activities, and certain other contaminants as well, which in a way disturb this natural heat budget. And that is indicated by the term radiative forcing. IPCC's latest report, the synthetic report that you have, that is the synthesis assessment of AR6, which IPCC has released. Now, as per IPCC report, methane is one of those particular gases or one of those pollutants in the atmosphere which particularly increase the rate of heating. So you have various different pollutants which will increase the rate of heating. At the same time, you have certain contaminants and certain atmospheric phenomena which will provide and induce cooling into the atmosphere. So accordingly, you have the classification into positive forcing as well as negative forcing. Positive forcing and negative forcing. So here, when we talk about positive forcing, these are those particular instruments, contaminants or phenomena which will increase the rate of heating. So it increases the rate of heating. Okay? For example, you have methane or greenhouse gases. Then, for example, we also have black carbon and other aerosols, few of the other aerosols that is emitted. For example, degraded landscape, degraded and desertified landscape. all these increase the rate of heating received on the planet. So they will be included under positive forcing. Whereas when we talk about negative forcing, these are those particular agents. For example, let's take the case of clouds. Now when we talk about clouds, so from the ground surface up, the clouds might appear of different coloration pattern, from dark black to brownish to sometimes light black to gray. So clouds will give you different coloration pattern when you observe it from the ground surface. But when you take a look at it from above, up in the sky, these clouds appear to be absolutely bright, and they end up reflecting greater amount of sunlight, as a result of which they provide natural cooling. So that is why all those phenomena which provide cooling, they are included under negative forcing. So this also includes sulfate aerosols. Sulfate aerosols, where sulfur dioxide in the upper atmosphere is able to react with the hydroxide ions or the hydroxyl ions, and thereby they are able to form very minute small aerosols which are brighter in appearance, and they also reflect the sunlight. So that is why under the aspect of mitigating the impact of climate change, when you study about geoengineering, that what can be done to provide artificial cooling, you will always come across the phenomena of injecting sulfate aerosols up into the atmosphere. And this is very similar to the case when you observe a volcanic eruption. In the natural circumstances, when you have volcanic eruption, significant quantity of sulfur dioxide and sulfate aerosols, they are released very high up in the atmosphere. And that is what provides a level of natural cooling. So that is why when you hear about the term mimicking a volcano to provide cooling, it is about injecting sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere so that a cooling level is provided. So these are, and other areas, for example, ice covered regions. Now ice covered regions, or the regions which are covered in ice cap and glacial masses, generally you will find that in these areas the albedo is very high. And when you have a very high albedo, that means very little amount of heat is absorbed, greater amount of heat is sent back and reflected, and that is what provides a level of natural cooling. So here always understand negative forcing will provide a level of cooling, whereas positive forcing will reinforce the rate of heating which is otherwise observed. Now, moving on to the next question. With reference to the e-waste management rules 2022, where the e-waste rules have been amended recently, consider the following statements. Now, these rules have mandated fixed targets to the producers of electronic and electrical equipment for waste collection. A relaxation has been provided to the companies from the necessity of registering on an online portal monitored by CPCB. Manufacturers of electronic and electrical equipment have been asked to restrict the use of hazardous substances. Market mechanism has been brought in enforcing EPR. EPR is what? It is basically the producer responsibility. Extended producer responsibility is what is referred to as EPR. Extended producer responsibility, whereby the producer is made responsible for the waste which is generated. So, market mechanism has been brought in enforcing EPR by tradable certificate. So, which of these statements are correct? So, here if you take a look at the statements, the first statement, that these rules have mandated fixed targets, that is absolutely correct. Now the producers of electronic and electrical equipments, based upon the total amount of production or the total amount of sales generated, whichever might be the case, they have got a mandated target whereby in the year, let's say between 24 to 26, you have to collect 60% of the total waste that you have generated. Then again it will progressively go up, that between 26 to 28, that is 2026 to 2028, that target will further escalate to 70%, 80%, and so on. So that is where a mandated target setting has been done, which was not there in the earlier rules. So that is the correct statement. A relaxation has been provided to the companies from the necessity of registering on an online portal monitored by CPCB. This is going to be incorrect. Why? Because now, even in the case of the amendment to the plastic rules and the plastic waste management rules, the amendment which has been brought in 2022 also, and the same case with the e-waste rules amendment also, here now the companies have to necessarily register on the online portal maintained by CPCB, whereby they are supposed to keep a track of the total amount produced and the total amount collected back. This ensures transparency, and this also fixes accountability at the side of the companies, whereby they won't generate excess amount of waste. So any business that you want to conduct, for that you need to register yourself on that portal. Now here again, if you are able to eliminate 2, automatically you will be able to eliminate 2 of the option statements in this case. Then manufacturers of electronic and electrical equipment have been asked to restrict the use of hazardous substances. This appears logically to be correct. So this is correct statement, where in the manufacturing of these items you have the production of lead, cadmium, selenium, silica. All these are produced during the production of electronic and electrical equipments. So the producers have been nudged to lower the level of these particular contaminants. Then market mechanism has been brought in to have a better implementation of EPR. That is going to be a correct statement as well. So in this case, the correct answer is going to be D, that is 1, 3, and 4. Now, majority of you have given the correct answer. Good to see that. Now, here you have to understand, when we talk about the tradable certificate, it is very similar to the aspect of carbon trading that you would have come across in the case of Kyoto Protocol and so on. So, the tradable certificates in general, here you will observe that, for example, let's say if you have a producer of electronic and electrical equipment, let's suppose you have got a kind of a producer here. Now this producer will generate the e-waste. Let's suppose that producer has generated 100 tons of e-waste. Okay. Now, as per the target that is set for the producer, let's say the target is to collect 60 tons back. That is the target which is set. Now, various different organizations and manufacturers, they will specialize in their own areas. You cannot expect a company or an electronic equipment manufacturer such as Philips or Apple or Samsung to be specializing in waste collection. Each of the different companies and organizations have their own specialization which is accrued to them. So here, let's suppose these companies are unable to meet their target to collect 60 tons. Out of 60 tons, let's say they have collected only about 40 tons. After giving cashback schemes, etc., they have managed to collect 40 tons. But still, you have a difference of 20 tons, which is yet to be collected. So in that case, what can be done is, suppose you have a startup. Let's suppose you guys get together and you open a startup for waste collection and their processing. Now that company A specializes in waste collection and collecting the different portions of the waste from different areas, processing it, and so on. Now here, this company A, let's suppose, has collected 40 tons of waste. So this company A will have the tradable certificates. You will have EPR certificates. Now out of those, the company, the producer, requires only 20 tons worth of certificate. So that can be sold to the company. In place of that, A will be paid some amount of money in return. So in this manner, what you are doing is you are ensuring waste collection. You are ensuring waste collection with a particular amount of efficiency. At the same time, we are able to ensure that the EPR targets are met and they are not nullified overall. Now, this is a very similar aspect which has been brought in terms of the plastic waste management as well. So that is a common feature in both these amendments which have been brought in last year in order to have a kind of a market implementation. Now, in the new e-waste rules, other thing that you have to notice is that solar photovoltaic cell waste, that has also been included as per the e-waste. So that is one of those particular salient points. And other salient point that you have to observe in this amendment is that because majority of the e-waste circulation recycling was happening in the informal sector, which led to great amount of inefficiency. At the same time, it brought about hazardous working conditions for the workers employed there. That is why these e-waste management rules 2022, they have also talked about bringing about skill development and also better working conditions and formalization of that e-waste processing sector in general. So all these aspects have been brought in as per the new rules. Okay? Now, after this, consider the following statements in the context of Wildlife Amendment Act 2022. So Wildlife Act 1972 has also been amended, and thereby you can expect a question from this easily. Now this amendment is enforced from 1st of April 2023. So all these amendments are now active. So it seeks to reduce the number of schedules from 6 to 4 in order to ensure better protection. A separate schedule dealing with vermin has been added in order to establish a standard operating procedure to deal with them. Now, what are vermins? When we say vermins, these are those species of organisms. It can vary. It can vary from state to state, but those organisms or those species which create a nuisance in that local population and that local area. In that case, the state government raises a request to the central government to allow it to ensure a kind of a planned killing in the cases where, let's say, there is a lot of nuisance created by a particular animal in the farmlands and so on. So thereby the animals can be neutralized. So that is where you have the vermins which come into play. Now, in the earlier Wildlife Protection Act 1972, you had a separate schedule, that is Schedule 5, which would deal with vermin separately, about how to notify these vermins, what to do when an animal or a species is declared as a vermin. It had all the designated rules associated. As per the amendment, this separate schedule has been completely removed. It is no longer in existence. So if you take a look at this question, it seeks to reduce the number of schedules from 6 to 4. That is correct. And this has been done. Why? This has been done in order to adhere to the norms of CITES, that is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. To adhere to the objectives and the norms of CITES, this amendment has been brought about. A separate schedule dealing with vermin, this is incorrect. So the correct statement is A1 only. If you take a look at few of the salient features provided by this amendment here, it proposes a new schedule for species listed in the appendices under CITES. Then it will also allow the central government to appoint a scientific authority to provide the guidance on matters relating to the impact of the survival of species and specimens on being traded. Now this is again oriented towards the requirement of CITES. This particular aspect which has been brought about is to fulfill the requirement of CITES. How? I hope we are aware that when we talk about CITES, you have the classification of species into various different appendices. Now, trade can be allowed in certain circumstances. Only in certain circumstances can trade be allowed, depending upon what is the conservation or the protection level provided to the species. But at the same time, the exporting country has to have a scientific body, a scientific authority, which will ensure that the organism is going to be safe. For example, let's take the case of cheetah, Asiatic cheetah. Now, Asiatic cheetah is extinct in India. It is not to be found in India. Asiatic cheetah is only to be found in Iran. Now, for a long period of time, when India was carrying out its plan of cheetah reintroduction in India, now this plan has been going on since the 60s and the 70s itself. Now, always India had a kind of an aim to bring about Asiatic cheetahs back into the landscape from where we have driven them out. Now, in this situation, if let's say Iran is going to send an Asiatic cheetah to India, so here Iran needs to have a kind of a scientific body which will ensure that the species that you are trading, the species that you are sending, that species is going to be safe and is going to be protected. It is in this case where, when we talk about cheetah reintroduction, Iran was not ready to take that responsibility, because at that point of time you had various litigations going on in the Supreme Court as well, where Kuno, the protected area of Kuno, was selected as both for lion relocation as well as cheetah reintroduction. So already cheetahs which are critically endangered in Iran, Iran could not take the responsibility that they will be safe in Kuno as well. So in order to fulfill that requirement of sites, you have the establishment of the scientific authority. Now, the bill also empowers the central government to regulate and stop the import, trade and possession of invasive plant and invasive alien species, which cause maximum destruction to the wildlife and is a significant factor and a causation for the loss of biodiversity. The penalties which were earlier enforced, those penalty levels have been elevated and they have been enhanced. So these are few of the major things that you should know, and that is going to be relevant for your examination, both for your prelims as well as for your mains. Now, taking a look at the other question with regards to the protected areas. Now, with reference to the established elephant reserves in India, arrange the following states in ascending order from the minimum to maximum number of elephant reserves located in the state. Meaning that out of the states which are listed, you have to find out which of them have the minimum number of elephant reserves, which of them have the maximum number of elephant reserves, and you have to arrange that in the ascending order. So here, if you take a look at it, let's take a look at it from each of the state wise. So when we talk about Jharkhand, how many different reserves that we have in Jharkhand when we talk about elephant reserves in Jharkhand? Here, in the case of Jharkhand, you have got only one. That is the Singhbhum Elephant Reserve that is present in Jharkhand. Whereas when we talk about Chhattisgarh, Chhattisgarh has got two. Earlier it had one, but recently, that is last year, you had the Lemru Elephant Reserve which was declared. So now it becomes two. Then you have Kerala. Kerala has got how many? It has got 4 elephant reserves. Maximum number of elephant reserves are present in Tamil Nadu. So that is where you will find the correct arrangement in terms of ascending order will be 1, 2, 3 and 4. That is going to be C. Okay. Tamil Nadu along with Assam have got significant amount of elephant reserves, that is 5. Now here, a couple of pointers that you should note. Out of the total list of elephant reserves that you see, please understand that learning all of them should not be your priority here. Because you have 33 elephant reserves, 53 tiger reserves, you will end up learning all of them. Not everything will be retained at the end of it. Which are the ones which have been declared latest? So in terms of elephant reserves, the latest elephant reserve to be added is that of the Tarai Elephant Reserve. Tarai Elephant Reserve. This is the latest one. We'll take a question for Tarai Elephant Reserve separately as well. Now here, Also, another thing that you have to keep in mind, which is the largest elephant reserve in terms of its aerial spread. In terms of its area, if you observe, the largest is the Mysore Elephant Reserve. Mysore Elephant Reserve. Okay? That is the largest one in general. As you can see, it has got 6,724 square kilometer of area. Then the smallest elephant reserve, that is again something that you should be aware of. The smallest is that of Intanki Elephant Reserve, which is situated in Nagaland. Intanki. Okay. Now, other thing that you can extract here is that Assam has got 5, as well as Tamil Nadu, they have got 5 elephant reserves which are included, and then comes Kerala, which has got 4. Okay, ideally when we think about elephant reserves, we generally have a kind of a mindset that obviously always Kerala is going to have the maximum, or states like Odisha or Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh will have more of them. But that is not the scenario. That is where you need to get an idea about it. Okay, now after that, in the context of Misti scheme launched by the government of India, consider the following statements. Now, in this year's budget, you had few of the schemes which were released, including Amrit Dharohar, including Misti. So this is a question about Misti scheme. Now here, it will help increase the area under mangrove vegetation in India. Public-private partnership shall be sought in mobilization of resources for the management practices. Funds from Manrega or Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme shall be used for the process of increasing the mangrove vegetation. So here, which of these statements are going to be correct? So in the first statement, it is going to increase the area under mangrove vegetation. That is going to be correct. Public-private partnership, will it be sought? Yes. Public-private partnership will be sought in order to exchange better information, better conservation practices, and also have a knowledge sharing in general. So that is going to be there. And when it comes to funding, funds from Manrega will be used. Other than that, the funds from compensatory afforestation program or CAMPA funds will also be used. Why Manrega funds will be used? Manrega funds will be used here in order to provide the working man days or the employment generation program, which can be further augmented in the name of increasing the mangrove vegetation across the country. And mangroves have got various utility that you would already have studied in the static portion. So that is where the Misti scheme comes into existence. Now, after that, which of the following statements about the newly launched Mangrove Alliance for Climate, right? Consider the following statements about the newly launched Mangrove Alliance for Climate. Now here, if you take a look at the statement, the first statement is, it is an initiative launched by India and Indonesia during the COP27, Conference of Parties 27 to UNFCCC, which was held in Egypt. Second is, the alliance shall set binding targets for the member countries to increase the area under mangrove vegetation. So, which of the above statements is or are incorrect? Okay? Now here, first statement. Now, is it an initiative launched by India and Indonesia? That is incorrect. It is launched by UAE. Now here you have to understand that UAE, why it has launched this program. Understand the basic background of it, and then you will never forget it. First of all, you have to understand that UAE had announced its intention or its plan to increase the area under mangrove vegetation way back in COP26 at Glasgow. That is when UAE had announced its intention to increase the mangrove vegetation in general. So here, In COP27, UAE is simply following up on that deal. And here, you also have to understand that UAE is going to host the Conference of Parties 28 in 2023 in Dubai. So there is a natural added pressure when you are hosting a summit and you are hosting a conference of parties this larger in proportion. There is always a kind of a pressure associated. So that is where this launching comes into play. Now, Indonesia is a significant partner because the mangrove vegetation and the mangrove spread, you'll find that almost 1/5 of the global mangrove population is to be found in Indonesia. And Indonesia not only has got significantly substantial amount of mangrove vegetation, it has also got a significant genetic diversity of the mangroves. For the survivability of any species, genetic diversity is absolutely important. Because let's say adverse climatic conditions or any particular diseases or pest attack, that will impact one of the genus of the species, one of the genetics of the species. So that is why genetic diversity brings about a resilience. India also consists of significant proportion of mangrove population almost all across and all through its coastline, including the island territories that we have. So we also have a significant proportion, and the genetic diversity, even though it is not as high as the case with Indonesia, but it is significant enough. In general, South and Southeast Asia, that is considered to be a hub for the mangroves, for the coral reef population, the warm water corals, all of that is found in significant quantity. The alliance shall set binding targets. Now here, whenever you come across alliances, coalitions, partnerships, etc., they will never set a binding target. Binding targets are set during the protocols. When you have any protocol which is set, that is where a binding target also comes into play. So this is also going to be incorrect. It is going to be a kind of a voluntary movement where each of the partners of this alliance, they are going to be encouraged to have more areas under mangrove population and mangrove vegetation. So which of them are incorrect? The answer is going to be C. That is both 1 and 2 are going to be incorrect. Good. Majority of you have given the correct answer. Then, climate change performance index is calculated on the basis of which of the parameters? So here, greenhouse gas emission. Now, climate change performance index has been making news. Why? Very simple. India's rank has been elevated as per this particular index. So that is something which reflects very good in terms of our policy measures in general. So which of these parameters are utilized to have an indexing or the rank provided by CCPI? So greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, energy use in general, and climate policy. So here you will find that all of these parameters, all these 4 parameters are utilized in order to find out the index. So the correct answer is going to be C, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this is one of those areas which you should necessarily focus upon, because UPSC tends to ask you about the parameters which are used, particularly for those indices where India's ranking has improved or has been relegated. Now in this case also you have to understand which is the organization which launches this particular index. So it is published by 3 NGOs. So if you get a kind of a twisted multiple choice question like, for example, IUCN or UNEP is associated with it, be very careful about that. So you have German Watch, New Climate Institute, and Climate Action Network International. All of them are involved in this indexing. Now here, another important thing to note here, another factual trivia to note here, which generally we don't come across, is the fact that in this indexing, none of the countries have scored well enough across all the parameters. So that is why the first 3 ranks in the overall ranking which has been given, the first 3 ranks are empty. No country has been allocated the first rank, second rank, or third rank. That is one of the important trivia. Denmark was ranked 4th, that is the best country. Then you have Sweden, best country in terms of the indexing obviously. Then you have Sweden, Chile, Morocco, and India is at 8th. Amongst the G20 nations, and currently G20 is in news, G20 is in relevance because India is hosting the G20 summit and India is the president and the chair of the G20 summit right now. So that is where amongst all the G20 nations, India is the highest placed country in terms of the climate performance index. Now here, India has been given significant amount of weightage and marks for the greenhouse gas emissions and energy use categories. And here in climate policy and renewable energy, we have been given a rating of medium. And this also suggests that India is well on its track to achieve 2030 emission targets compatible with the target setting which has been done by the INDCs that India has declared. Now, amongst the major economies that you have, India is the only major economy which is still on its path and its target to be able to achieve its INDC declared as per the Paris Agreement amongst the major economies if you consider. And all the declaration that India has made, that declaration about reducing the carbon intensity of GDP by 2030, by increasing the share of renewables by 2030. All these targets, they are a part of what? The Panchamrit program or the Panchamrit goals. Now, when did this Panchamrit goals be declared or when were they declared in general? They were declared in COP26 at Glasgow. Okay, another thing to keep in your mind. Now, moving on to the next question. Sabhagita guidelines and Amrit Dharohar scheme, they are associated with afforestation of the mangroves, protection of wildlife from poachers by community participation, conservation of estuaries in the coastal states, and conservation of wetlands. So Sabhagita guidelines and Amrit Dharohar scheme, they are associated with which of them? So here, this is a straightforward, simple question. So the answer is going to be D, that is conservation of wetlands. Now, Amrit Dharohar scheme is one of those schemes which have been announced as per the budgetary declaration of 2023. And along with that, Sabhagita guidelines. Now, what Sabhagita guidelines talk about is the very basic essence of conservation that we have been talking about, that in order to improve the level of conservation, we have to ensure that there is a local participation. The local community members, they have to be made a stakeholder in protection and conservation. So that is included as per the Sabhagita guidelines. And to deal with this particular wetlands, in order to improve the wise use principle, wise use principle is always associated with the Ramsar sites in general or the wetlands in general, where you take the utilization or you make utilization of the wetlands which are present, but use it sustainably. So this is about sustainability in general. Sustainability. Okay? So that is where this particular guidelines are for. Okay? Now, in the context of the recently held UN Water Conference, consider the following statements. UN Water Conference was recently held in New York and celebrating the World Water Day, which is celebrated on 22nd of March. Around that point of time, you had the UN Water Conference. So it was the first conference held under the auspices of United Nations to discuss the dangers of water scarcity. Second, it is an intergovernmental discussion about the policy measures needed to conserve water. Third, the conference oversaw the presentation of the UN World Water Development Report 2023. Now here, which of the statements is or are incorrect? Always be very watchful for this, whether you have to find out the correct statement or the incorrect statement out of them all. So the first statement, the first conference held under the auspices of United Nations, that is going to be incorrect. Why? Because here, if you think about it, previously, around 46 years ago. This is the second conference. It is not as if this conference is held annually. 46 years ago, that is in 1977, the first conference was held in Argentina. Okay? So that is where the first conference was held. So it is the second conference. Second, it is an intergovernmental discussion about the policy measures. It is not an intergovernmental discussion. It is a discussion of various institutes, NGOs, the civil society organizations, all of them who work for water utilization, water conservation, and water sustainability. All of them were included in this conference. So this is also going to be incorrect. The conference oversaw the presentation of UN World Water Development Report 2023. So this is going to be correct. So here, which of them are incorrect? The answer is going to be D, that is 1 and 2 only. Now here you have to understand that again, you have significant amount of findings which were highlighted during this particular conference, where it was talked about the fact, and there was a general discussion that around 10% of the global population, they are suffering from absolute scarcity or maximum scarcity of availability of water. So there the problem is going to get exaggerated in the near-term future. Significant amount of utilization of groundwater, that was also pointed out, that maximum amount of utilization of groundwater is happening due to agricultural purposes, and unsustainable agricultural purposes and practices, they are depleting the water resources at an alarming rate. For example, in our country, if you take the case of it, take the case of paddy growth or growing of paddy and rice crop in the region of Punjab, Haryana and Western UP. Now paddy as a crop generally requires 130 to 140 centimeter of rain annually. Minimum amount of rainfall required by paddy is 100 centimeter. That is the kind of a limitation, a boundary line. Now, in the region that we are talking about, northern and northwestern part of the country, Punjab, Haryana and Western UP, the average annual rainfall which is received is in the tune of sometimes even 60, sometimes around 75 centimeter per annum. So this is the amount of rainfall received, and this is the amount of water required for the growth of paddy. So how do you compensate for that? You extract groundwater. It is due to this reason that groundwater in these areas, they are particularly being contaminated with the heavy contaminants and various different contaminants like uranium, selenium, cadmium. All these contaminants are to be found in the groundwater, particularly in the states such as Punjab and Haryana. So that is where the groundwater is getting depleted. Now, once the groundwater starts to deplete, please understand that the cost of production also increases. Why and how? So the cost of production of food crops always increases with the depletion of groundwater. And that is because if the groundwater is available at a much lower level, you have to invest much more in extraction of that water, in digging deep pumps and deep pipelines, and then extraction utilization of greater amount of electrical energy will also happen, and that is where it is a costly endeavor. So in order to have the agricultural cost limited, agricultural prices also to be limited, you have to restrict the utilization of this groundwater. This particular report also highlights about the fact that in the coming years, if the trends continue, it will bring about a kind of a water inequality in the world, where the rich countries and the richer population, they will always have access to safe drinking water, but it is the poorest of the poorer class which will never be able to afford clean drinking water, leading to significant amount of diseases in the process as well, such as the jaundice as well as typhoid. These are the diseases which oftentimes accrue and accompany the dirtied or the muddied water. So that is the aspect of water conference. Now, next question. With reference to Pabitra Wildlife Sanctuary, consider the following statements. Located in the Brahmaputra plains, the region has a higher rhino density as compared to Kaziranga. one-horned rhinos have been relocated from here to Manas as per the India Rhino Vision Plan. Which of the statements is or are correct? Now here, when we take a look at the first statement, so first statement is going to be correct. Pabitra, as of now in the entire Brahmaputra plains, has got one of the highest densities of one-horned rhino. So much so that Pabitra is said to be overpopulated. It doesn't have enough habitat space available for individual rhino population. That is why in the past few years, under the watchful eyes of WWF and so on, these rhinos have been relocated to the region of Manas in order to provide them with a freer movement as well. So they have been relocated from here to Manas. And India Rhino Vision, if you talk about it, now this was a plan which was launched way back in 2005 to be achieved till 2020. And this was to increase the rhino population across 7 protected areas in the region of Assam. So if you talk about the rhino population, generally when we think about rhino population, we are able to think about only 3 protected areas in general. That is Kaziranga, Manas, as well as Pabitra, but that is not the case. 7 different protected areas across Assam, they have a viable rhino population, and that Rhino Vision set a plan to increase the population. Now, lately it was declared that the population has significantly increased in the Assam plains because the poaching incidents, they have reduced quite dramatically. So here, which of the statements is or are correct? The answer is going to be C, that is both 1 and 2. Now, you have these 7 protected areas that are Kaziranga, Pabitra, Orang, Manas, Laukhova, then Burachapori, as well as Dibru Saikhova. These are your 7 protected areas in Assam where you will find a viable rhino population, and this should be noted. Majority of us will know about the major ones, but the minor ones you need to know about. Okay? Then, after that, Kaziranga has highest density of rhinos? No. Tanish, if you consider in the local area-wise population, Kaziranga is larger in area also, you have to understand. But in that local area, if you consider, Pabitra has got a higher density. Now, Emission Gap report is generated by United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Continuous Emission Monitoring System of United Nations, International Monetary Fund. Which of them generates the Emission Gap report? Now, yesterday we talked about the various organizations, the formation of various organizations. So this should be particularly easier for you. So this is released by UNEP. Now, UNEP releases both the Adaptation Gap report as well as the Emission Gap report. Now, as per this report, the major findings of this report, if you will analyze. So here you will analyze the top 7 emitters, China, EU, India, Indonesia, all of these, United States, all of them are the major emitters. And plus the international transportation system and the entire system of transportation, vehicular movement, they accounted for 55% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. And here, during the pandemic, we all know that the emissions level, they did reduce, but again, post-pandemic, the amount of emissions, they further accelerated upwards. Now here, the G20 members, they are responsible for 75% of global emission. Why is this relevant? Because of the G20 summit. Now, global per capita emission of greenhouse gases is around 6.3 tons of CO2 equivalent. Whereas when you talk about India, despite the fact that in absolute terms, India is one of the largest emitters, here per capita emission is significantly lesser. It is around 2.4 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is released by India. Okay, so these are some of the major things and trivial factors that you should consider. Consider the following statements for Asian Palm Oil Alliance in news recently. Indonesia and Malaysia, being the largest producers of palm oil, lead the initiative. It was launched during the Globe Oil Summit at Agra in September 2022. It includes palm oil importing nations of Asia. Which of the following statements is or are correct? Now here, if you take a look at it, the entire Asian Palm Oil Alliance, that has been formed by the importing nations in general. So here, which are the chief or the major importing nations of palm oil, especially in the region of Asia? You have India, you have Pakistan, then after that Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. These are your major importers. Now, why they have formed this alliance is because of the very basic fact that the production has been monopolized by Indonesia and Malaysia. These being one of the larger producers, they are able to impact the geopolitical strategic sphere because of their heft that they carry because of the palm oil pricing. Now, if you are not importing from Malaysia, you will be forced to import from Indonesia, and vice versa is also true. In the name of that palm oil production, the other aspect of it is that significantly large scales and larger areas of very pristine and natural tropical evergreen forests, they are every year, hundreds of hectares of these forests are cut down in Indonesia in order to have this monoculture of palm oil. Now, due to the utility of palm oil, that as a product it is used in variety of various different products, from eatables or the food consumption to the aspect of cosmetics and various different utilities, soap, detergents, everywhere you have the utility of palm oil. So the utilization or the demand is very high. The production is limited by these two countries. So that brings about a scope of significant amount of monopolization of the market. So in order to have a better control of the market, in order to have a unified say, that is where in the Globe Oil Summit at Agra, these countries came together and they formed the Asian Palm Oil Alliance. So we have to find out which of the statements is or are correct. So the first statement is going to be incorrect. Indonesia and Malaysia, they are not going to be part of this initiative. Then, was launched during the Globe Oil Summit at Agra in September 2022. This is going to be the correct statement. And it includes palm oil importing nations of Asia. These nations we have talked about, that is also going to be correct. So here the correct answer is going to be 2 and 3 only. Here what you have to understand is that which are the countries involved, where was it launched, initial leadership role will be provided to India, and after that it will be a kind of a rotating system, and also what is the purpose of the formation. For any organization, if you know this much, more than sufficient. Okay? Then after that, moving on to the next question. Consider the following statements with reference to the Adaptation Fund. Now, it finances projects and programs in developing countries to adapt to climate change. Second, financing for the fund comes from sales of certified emission reductions issued under CDM, Clean Development Mechanism only. Third, national and regional entities can directly access finance from the Adaptation Fund. Which of these statements given above is or are correct? Now here, the first statement, it finances projects and programs in developing nations to adapt to climate change. That is very correct. Second, if you take a look at the second statement, it tells you that Adaptation Funds gets its contribution from the CERs, the credits which are issued as per CDM. But here, there is an absolute term that is only. Whenever you have only, always, never, all these absolute terms, they are a red flag. So here, this is going to be incorrect. Because here you also have the Adaptation Fund is also contributed to by the various different developed nations. Remember, when we talk about the various protocols and the various conventions for climate change, the developed nations have got a particular amount of obligation under CBDR, that is common but differentiated responsibility, to provide funds in order to mitigate and help the countries adapt to the changing environmental conditions. So that is going to be the second statement being incorrect. Third, national and regional entities can directly access finance from the adaptation fund. This is going to be a correct statement. If you have those programs which are run, and if those programs fulfill the criteria, you will be given money under the adaptation fund. So here the correct answer is going to be C, that is 1 and 3 only. Now here one thing that you have to understand is the aspect of CER and CDM. So CDM, or Clean Development Mechanism, that had been devised under what convention or protocol? So this had been devised under the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol to UNFCCC. Now under Kyoto Protocol in general is well renowned for the various market mechanisms that it brought into the picture in order to have better implementation of the carbon cap in general and the emissions target, so that they could be followed and they could be significantly observed. That is why it brought market mechanisms. So Kyoto brought 3 different market mechanisms. One was joint implementation, or JI. The second was Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM. And the third was international emission trading, similar to carbon trading in general. Now, which of them is used, that is also relevant because it is still being used in many of the cases. So when we talk about the Kyoto Protocol, it divided the various different countries into different groups. So you had Annex 1 countries, Annex 1, which included developed countries. Now in these countries, targets were set for emissions that you cannot emit beyond than this. And also these countries were obligated to provide financial and technical assistance for other countries in order to help them remove the carbon emissions from their own region. So this is again a part of CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility. You had Annex 2 countries. They were supposed to provide financial assistance to the developing nations in order to adapt to climate change conditions. So these included OECD countries and economies in transition. And then you had the non-Annex 1 countries, as they were referred to. These were non-Annex 1 countries. These included the developing nations, developing countries, and the LDCs, least developed countries in general. So they were included in non-Annex 1, or the third category, as you can refer to. Now JI, or joint implementation, is for any product or program to reduce emission in between the developed nation. That is what is joint implementation. So that is where you have one developed nation helping another developed nation put a kind of a program or any kind of project which will reduce the emission levels. CDM, or Clean Development Mechanism, for which you are given the CERs as credits, that has to happen between Annex 1 and the developing nations. It is here where if you implement, the developed nation is going to implement one of those projects which will reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. Those particular projects were to be implemented, and in return these countries will get CERs, right? Or the credit system was provided. So that is basically the aspect of CDM which was initiated, which was brought in by the Kyoto. International emission trading talked about the aspect of cap and trade, where you have your fixed target. If you are emitting beyond that, then you can compensate for it by buying the certificate, credit certificate from some other region which has overachieved its target. So that was included in the portion of IET. Okay. Now, after this, the next question. Now, the government-operated Samir app recently in news is associated with which of the following? Prediction of pollution levels in the cities in the near-term future, online tracking of protected areas in the country, provision of hourly updates on the National Air Quality Index, and application for granting of environmental clearances. For which of them Samir app is utilized? So here the answer is straightforward. Provision of hourly updates on the National Air Quality Index. Now, why this was in news was because of very different reason, that the app had crashed significantly and there was no updation of data for significant duration of time. Now, here this also includes a greater amount of transparency in tracking the air quality levels as is implemented in various different parts. Okay, as the implementation of various programs to combat air pollution is being carried out, what is the status of it? Now, prediction of pollution levels in the cities in near-term future, this is predicted by SUFFER. That is also important. SUFFER, when we talk about, that has got a prediction model associated with it. Taking a look at the various contributors to air pollution, this will give you an idea about the near-term future as well. Which one of the following options is incorrect with reference to black carbon? It is the complex mixture of particulate matter resulting from the incomplete combustion of fossil fuels. It generally lasts long in the atmosphere because of its ability to absorb light as heat. The deposition of black carbon in the Arctic decreases the Earth's ability to reflect the warming rays of the sun. Black carbon is always co-emitted with other particles and gases which can have cooling effect on the climate. So, which of these is incorrect with reference to black carbon? So here, if you observe, B is going to be the incorrect one because all of them are going to be correct. Why B is going to be incorrect? Because again, as we discussed, black carbon along with methane, along with ozone, that forms a short-lived climatic pollutant in general. Overall, black carbon deposits which are happening over ice sheets, over the glacial regions, over the mountainous areas, what it induces is, it brings about increased rate of heating. Because let's say we have any ice covered area, on top of it if you have black carbon, immediately what it does is, it reduces the albedo level. So when the albedo reduces, or observes a drastic fall, that means there is lesser reflection and greater absorption of heat. Greater absorption. So due to that greater absorption, it will initiate the melting. This black carbon deposit is also one of the major reasons behind the melting of snow and glacier, retreat of glacier as is observed in the Himalayan landscape. That is again something you have to keep in mind. Otherwise, if you take a look at these short-lived climatic pollutants, you will observe that black carbon, observe the impact of it as well. Black carbon sources, burning of coal, combustion of coal, or combustion of any kind of hydrocarbon or fossil fuel will produce this black carbon. And what is the size of black carbon? Is it large enough to be separated by the mucosa membrane of our respiratory system, or is it something that we inhale? So here understand, black carbon has got particularly lower size. It comes under PM 2.5 category. That is where it has got the ability to be inhaled and it can puncture the various different vessels of the lung and it can cause respiratory illnesses. Diesel exhaust, biomass for cooking stoves, for example, burning of charcoal for cooking, etc. All of that releases a lot of black carbon. Now here the impact of black carbon emission is largely local and in certain cases regional in that territory as well. So when we talk about the Himalayan region getting impacted by black carbon, it is the regional level of impact. Then you have methane. Methane is produced from natural gas, livestock in general, landfills, agricultural purposes. Now methane survives for significantly larger duration as compared to black carbon, but much lesser as compared to carbon dioxide itself. Now the impact of methane emission is observed at a global scale because it increases the radiative forcing. It provides a kind of a positive radiative forcing. Tropospheric ozone or the ground level ozone. Now ground level ozone, you have to understand, is a secondary pollutant. So that ground level ozone is produced due to the presence of methane, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide and volatile organic compounds. If you recall, nitrogen oxides in the presence of volatile organic compounds and in the presence of sunlight, they are able to produce the ground level ozone. And if you have residual hydrocarbons, unburnt hydrocarbons, which are also to be found in the region, that significantly leads to the production of PAN, or peroxyacetyl nitrate, which is also referred to as the photochemical smog. So this impact will also be at a local and a regional level. Then you have hydrofluorocarbons or HFCs, generally used in extinguishers, air conditioning and refrigeration. Now these HFCs, they have a global impact. Now what is the impact of HFCs in general? When we talk about HFCs impact, where is it that we feel the impact the maximum? So understand, HFCs, as is the larger misconception, HFCs don't impact the ozone layer. They don't carry out the ozone depletion. Majority of us, when we think about HFCs, we think that they are going to puncture the ozone layer or they are going to create the ozone hole. But that is not the case. What punctures or impacts the ozone layer and ozone hole is the presence of HCFCs. HCFCs and CFCs. They will impact the ozone layer. HFCs are considered to be significantly and comparatively safer for the ozone layer. So why is it that HFC is harmful in that case? That is because it has got very high greenhouse warming potential, or global warming potential is very high. Global warming potential is very high. That is why. Okay? In majority of the cases, these HFCs, they have been used as replacements in air conditioners and refrigerants. That is where Kigali Amendment is also instrumental, because Kigali Amendment talks about the phasing of HFCs altogether. That is where Kigali Amendment has set a kind of a relaxed timeline for the phasing out of the HFCs. So please don't get confused between HCFCs and HFCs. Okay? Now here, after this, moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements is correct with reference to global warming? It is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing longer wavelengths of incoming infrared radiation from the sun. It is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing shorter wavelengths of infrared radiation emanating from the earth. It is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing longer wavelengths of infrared radiation emanating from the earth, and it is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing shorter wavelengths of incoming infrared radiation from the sun. So which of them are able to create global warming? In general, you have to understand that why greenhouse effect happens. If you are clear in that, this question is very simple to be able to solve. Now here, the correct statement is going to be C. Now, what is the fundamental behind it, or the very basic behind it? Here you will observe that, let's say this is the surface and then you have the atmosphere. So when we talk about the solar rays, the incoming solar radiation, those incoming solar radiation, they will have very high amount of energy and they will be in the form of short waves. Always higher energy means short waves. And then after heating the Earth's surface also starts radiating heat, but this has got lower energy in it. And that is why, because it has lower energy, it will be a kind of long wave radiation. The presence of the gases present, the gases which are present here, now those gases will be able to retain that heat, reflect and re-radiate it back to the surface, thereby providing increased heating to the surface and increased heating to the atmosphere as well. So that is the aspect of global warming. Now, consider the following statements with reference to the climate change feedback loop system of the Earth. So, the thawing of the permafrost is a part of the positive feedback loop of the Earth's climate systems. Desertification is a part of the negative feedback loop of the Earth's climate system. So which of them are a part of the climate change feedback loop system? Here, if you consider what is a climate change feedback loop system, so when we say positive feedback loop is the one which has got increased level of heating, right? This increases heating, the rate of heating. Okay? And then when we say negative feedback loop, that provides a kind of cooling. Okay? So this provides the rate of cooling. So here, the thawing of permafrost is melting of permafrost, where permafrost or the permanently frozen areas, they break up and you have the normal region which is exposed. Now in that situation, it will start absorbing greater amount of heat, because when we have the permafrost regions, they will reflect more, absorb less, and that is something which is going to provide cooling. But when this permafrost region is done away with, or there is a thawing in it, that is when the positive feedback loop is initiated or kicked in. So this is correct. Desertification is not something which is going to provide cooling. It is again going to exaggerate the rate of heating, as we have seen earlier in the case of radiative forcing as well, that desertification and degradation, they increase the rate of heating in general. So here the second statement is going to be incorrect. So which is correct? The correct answer is going to be A, that is one only. Okay? Now here significant majority of you have given the incorrect answer. So I hope now you understand what is the feedback loop system. When we talk about water vapor, for example, water vapor kicks in a positive feedback loop system. It absorbs heat, it retains heat, increased amount of evaporation, increased retention of heat. So it is a positive feedback loop. Ice covered areas, negative feedback loop. Cloud formation, negative feedback loop. So that is the aspect of it. Now, with reference to the black corals recently in news, consider the following statements. Their presence is restricted to deep oceanic waters. These do not have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. They are threatened by illegal harvesting for jewelry. How many statements given above is or are correct? So here, their presence is restricted to the deep oceanic waters. So this is going to be incorrect. Why? Because these black corals, this is how the black corals appear. They are basically your filter feeders. Now, they are found very close to the sea level, sea surface, in shallower waters, as well as at greater depths of many thousand meters as well. So that is why they do not require the symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae, and that is where they are able to live significantly in an independent manner. And where do they get that food? The various different substrates which keep on moving in the oceanic water. That is why these are filter feeders, you have to keep in mind. And they have got a very large time span, or lifespan in general is very large. It can span for hundreds, and in certain cases it is estimated that the lifespan can even last for 1,000 years. So they do not have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. That is correct. They are threatened by illegal harvesting for jewelry. That is again correct. So how many of them are correct? You have B, that is 2 are correct. Madhu, about the positive feedback loop system. Okay, positive feedback loop system, please understand, is about the rate of heating or cooling which is provided. So for example, suppose, let's say, when we talk about, take the case of permafrost itself. Let's take the case of permafrost itself. Let's suppose a permanently frozen area. Now, in general, the frozen area will reflect significant amount of heat, absorb very less. Now, that will provide cooling. Under normal conditions, it will provide cooling, isn't it? But when you have thawing of that permafrost, means what? That it will break into different parts. Now these permafrost areas, when they break, they will expose either the water which lies underneath or the land surface which lies underneath. Now both of the land surface as well as water will absorb greater amount of heat as compared to the ice. Ice, being whitish in color and appearance, will have the ability to reflect more. So let's suppose they have started absorbing more. When they start to absorb more, that brings about what? Increased heat absorption. Increased heat absorption in general. So increased heat absorption will increase the overall heating of the planet. So that is the positive feedback. How? Because if there is increased heat absorption, means what? More ice will melt. So more ice melts, and when you have more ice which will melt, will mean what? Greater heat absorption, because more area will be exposed. So that is where it is a feedback loop. Similar is the case with water vapor as well. If you have the ground surface, if you have water vapor which is present, now water vapor, it retains heat, and when it retains heat means what? It will heat up the ground surface as well. So the ground gets heated up. When the ground gets heated up, that means what? Greater amount of evaporation. Greater evaporation. And when you have a greater evaporation means greater retention of heat. So again, a kind of a feedback loop system. So anything which accelerates the rate of heating, that is positive. Anything which provides a rate of cooling, that is what is negative. Okay, I hope that is understood. Then after that, we come to the next question. Consider the following statements with reference to the biodiversity hotspots. Now, a region must have more than 1500 fauna species as endemic. Endemic means found in that region and nowhere else, to be declared as a biodiversity hotspot. All the global biodiversity hotspots are located within the tropical latitudes of both the hemispheres. The Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund is responsible for protecting the world's biodiversity hotspots in developing countries and transitional economies. Here we have to find out how many statements given above is or are incorrect. So taking a look at the first statement. Now, what is the requirement or the criteria for any region to be declared as a biodiversity hotspot? It requires two conditions to be fulfilled primarily. First of all is you need to have 1500 endemic vascular plants. Endemic vascular plants. That is to be found only in that region and nowhere else. So that is the first requirement. So if you take a look at the first statement, it talks about faunal species rather than floral species. So first is incorrect. Now the second condition which is required for an area to be designated a biodiversity hotspot is basically that you might have, or you should have, that region should have experienced a significant loss in terms of its biodiversity, in the sense that you would have had experienced close to around 70% loss. That is where you need an urgent amount of protection. So all the global biodiversity hotspots are located within the tropical latitudes. This is incorrect. We'll take a look at it. And the third is correct, that Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund is responsible for providing a kind of a maintenance, guidance, etc. for the conservation of biodiversity hotspots. So out of this, here you will find B, 1 and 2, that is going to be incorrect. So you have two statements which are incorrect. Now take a look at the global biodiversity hotspot distribution overall. Now for your examination, obviously you don't need to learn all of them. There are around 36 global biodiversity hotspots. There is no requirement to learn all of them. It is not possible as well. But you will observe that few of them, for example, the one in New Zealand and so on, they are clearly not placed in the tropics. So biodiversity hotspots and the presence of them, it is not required to be present in the tropics itself. Okay, now here you have to understand that when we talk about the biodiversity hotspots, which are the ones which lie across Indian landscape and the Indian region. So across India, you have 4 global biodiversity hotspots which lie partially or significantly in India. So one is the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot. The first is the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot. Now it consists of clouded leopards, snow leopards, bears, red panda population. All of these are included in this. Then you have the Indo-Burma forest hotspot. Indo-Burma. Now Himalayan hotspot will have the mountainous ecosystem and mountainous habitat. Indo-Burma significantly dotted with lot of forest, dense forest, as well as lot of arboreal species. That is the species of various monkeys, apes, that is something which is going to be found. Then you have Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. And also we have the presence of the Sundaland hotspot. Sundaland hotspot is present where? In Great Nicobar. That is where that is situated. Okay? So this is something you have to keep in mind. Okay? Shanawaz, there is more mangrove in eastern part, but it doesn't have any hotspot. See, just the presence or the population of mangrove will not be a deciding factor. If you have many different genetics and many varieties of mangroves, that can be a deciding factor. So, and also that region has to have had experienced significant amount of loss of biodiversity in order to bring about a level of conservation or protection to be declared as a hotspot. So all these are important. Zooxanthellae, Narendra Kaur, is basically the algae, the symbiotic algae which lives along with the corals. In the normal warm water corals, what do you find is that in case of any kind of warm water coral or a coral polyp, you'll find that they have significant amount of tentacles. Now these tentacles are there to trap food and direct it through the opening in the mouth. Here is where they have the opening. But obviously in the oceanic ecosystem, they don't get access to enough amount of food. They are dependent on being the filter feeders, catching any substrate floating here and there. That is where they have a symbiotic relationship with the zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae is the one which provides the vivid coloration pattern to the corals. Now this zooxanthellae gets a platform for growth, and in return, in the availability of sunlight, they are able to manufacture food with the help of photosynthesis. That is why the zooxanthellae is to be found in these shallower areas of warm water corals. Okay? Then, with reference to the biosphere reserves in India, consider the following statements. Nokrek Biosphere Reserve in the Meghalaya Plateau is the smallest biosphere reserve in India. The very famous Pin Valley National Park is situated in the Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve. The Kutch Biosphere Reserve is the largest biosphere reserve in terms of area in India. So which of the statements is or are correct? So this talks about various different biosphere reserves in general. So here, the first statement, if you take a look at it, No Creek. Now, No Creek is the second smallest. It is not exactly the smallest. Which is the smallest? The smallest is going to be Dibru-Saikhowa. That is going to be the smallest. Kutch is the largest biosphere reserve. Then this is incorrect. Now the Pin Valley National Park is situated in the Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve. Now this is going to be incorrect. Why? Because Pin Valley is a part of the Cold Desert Biosphere Reserve. It is not a part of the Nanda Devi Reserve. So second statement is also going to be incorrect. And Kutch is the largest biosphere reserve in terms of its area. So the correct answer in this case is going to be D, that is 3 only. So this is the basic of the biosphere reserve. As I can see, majority of you have got it incorrect. So understand that these are the major biosphere reserves across the country. Here, ideally, because the biosphere reserves are not very significantly large in number, this is absolutely doable. This is something that you can absolutely cover. What are the various protected areas? Because within each biosphere reserve, you will have multiple different protected areas which are included. So that is something which should be kept in mind. And accordingly, if you take a look at biosphere reserves, each of them have very unique species. For example, in the Gulf of Mannar and also the Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve, in both these, you will find the species of dugong. Dugong is one of those species which is found typically in those particular areas. Okay, then if you take an example of Kanchenjunga, now here significant portion of Kanchenjunga that lies in the region of Nepal. So here it is the eastern part and the surrounding landscape thereby that is included in the biosphere reserve. So that is something which should be kept in mind. Now, another question. It is one of the biosphere reserves in India that hosts mangrove forests. More than 4,000 species of plants and animals representing primitive to higher forms make it one of the richest coastal regions of India. This habitat is the feeding ground for the largest endangered marine mammal, dugong. It is the last refuge to the unique living fossil Belanoglus that links vertebrates to the invertebrates. So basically, you will find the presence of Belanoglosus in this particular area, which is a kind of a demarcating feature. So which biosphere reserve of India is being referred to in the passage given above? So here, where is it that you find this? It is basically, if you take a look at it, here you will find it in the region of Great Nicobar. Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve is something where you will find that, but here you also have to understand that Gulf of Mannar also has got a substantial amount of dugong population in it. Okay, so Gulf of Mannar, please don't get confused by it that dugong population won't be found there. Dugong population is to be found in both these areas. Now Belanoglosus, if you observe, this forms a linkage between the vertebrates and the invertebrates. Okay, so the vertebrate and the invertebrate in their evolutionary scale, this is one of the important factors. Okay, so here just again I would reiterate, don't get waylaid by only the dugong. Dugong in significant proportion is found in the region of Gulf of Mannar as well. Okay, now which of the following statements is correct with reference to Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve? So here, Nagarhole National Park and Mukurthi National Park are part of the reserve. It includes tropical evergreen forest and thorn forest. It is home to tribes like Paniyas, Todas and Kotas. So which of the given statements above is or are correct? So here the correct answer is going to be all of them. All of them are going to be included in the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So the correct answer is going to be D, that is 1, 2 and 3. Okay. Now here, understand that in the previous one, again I would reiterate because many of you are having confusion in this. Is this something which is Clear? I hope this is clear. I hope that this is something which is understood, but please understand that Gulf of Mannar also suits the locality or the conditionalities of this biosphere reserve. So I hope this is something which is clear, and any doubts, feel free to ask that down. Now, here when we talk about the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, the kind of forest that you find in that region, thorn forest and tropical evergreen. Thorn forest on the eastern side and tropical evergreen on the western part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. It is a very large area. It provides the passage of animals and wildlife from, and provides a kind of a significant corridor as well. So that is where you will have the utility of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. With reference to the Bandipur Tiger Reserve, consider the following statements. It has got the presence of tropical deciduous forest and shrublands. It acts as wildlife corridor for animals moving between Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats. It is surrounded by two tiger reserves, namely Nagarhole Tiger Reserve and Dandeli Tiger Reserve. Okay? So here, which of the statements given above is or are correct? So here, if you take a look at the first statement, it has got the presence of tropical deciduous forest and shrubland. That is going to be correct. It acts as a wildlife corridor for animals moving between Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats. That is also going to be correct. And it is surrounded by two tiger reserves, namely Nagarhole and Dandeli. This is going to be incorrect. Dandeli is not situated around Bandipur. Here you have Nagarhole and Mudumalai, which is situated close by. Okay, so here that is going to be incorrect. So the correct answer in this case is going to be B, that is 1 and 2 only. Okay, I hope this is clear. Neetu, in that case, if you consider Gulf of Mannar, that can also be considered, as I told you, because the dugong population is also significantly present in the region of Gulf of Mannar. Okay, so in that case, again, I will reiterate, everyone who is getting confused in that, Gulf of Mannar can also be considered in that case. Okay, then India's first dark sky reserve has been declared in which protected area? Dark sky reserve. So, Karakoram Wildlife Sanctuary, Changthang Wildlife Sanctuary, Dachigam National Park, Kiber Wildlife Sanctuary. Where is it that you have the first dark sky reserve being declared? So, that has been declared at Hanle in the region of Ladakh, and that is in the Changthang Wildlife Sanctuary. So here, basically, dark sky reserve, what is the concept of dark sky reserve? Because when we have significant amount of artificial light in any particular region, that decreases our ability to observe the various atmospheric phenomena and atmospheric events in general. And this is an event which is also what is referred to as sky glow. This is an event which is referred to as sky glow in general. So that is where, in order to have better observatory and better observation of the astronomical region, that is where a dark sky reserve has been declared. Where has it been declared? At Hanle in the region of Ladakh. Okay. Changthang Wildlife Sanctuary, it has got significant amount of high altitude water bodies included in that. So here you will find significant proportion of water bodies, for example, Pangong So, Somoriri, and also Sukar. All of these water bodies you will find here. Here in the Changthang Wildlife Sanctuary, you will also find the presence of the very elusive, what is referred to as a ghost of the mountain, that is snow leopard. So snow leopard is also to be found here. Okay? Snow leopard is also to be found. Now, consider the following statements about the recently declared Tarai Elephant Reserve. The elephant reserve is going to provide conservation to elephants along with the tigers and one-horned rhino. The Tarai Elephant Reserve is going to be spread across the northern part of Assam Plains in the foothills of the Shivalik. It will comprise the forest areas of Kishanpur Wildlife Sanctuary and Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary. So which of them are incorrect? Which of the statements is going to be incorrect? So here, if you take a look at the first statement, the elephant reserve is going to provide conservation to elephants along with tigers and one-horned rhino. That is going to be correct. The Tarai Elephant Reserve is going to be spread across the northern part of Assam Plains in the foothills of Shivaliks. This is going to be incorrect. Tarai region is going to be present in the northern part of Uttar Pradesh Plains. Then, it will comprise the forest areas of Kishanpur Wildlife Sanctuary and Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, these two wildlife sanctuaries have been in news recently because of spotting of tiger. Now, Katarnia Ghat, for example, it forms an important wildlife corridor connecting the tiger region in the southern part of Nepal and in the Tarai belt of Uttar Pradesh, the northern part of Uttar Pradesh. That is where Katarnia Ghat forms a kind of wildlife corridor. Wildlife corridor. Okay? So that is something which you will find in this situation. Now, Kishanpur is one end of that wildlife corridor. Here also you will find significant amount of tiger population. Now, the Tarai Elephant Reserve in general, when you think about elephant reserve in the Tarai belt, you never think about the population of one-horned rhino. So here one-horned rhino, the population is also increasing significantly in those areas. So there have been a growth or a spurt in the population of one-horned rhinos, particularly in the northern part of Uttar Pradesh. So here, which of them are incorrect? So the correct answer in this case is going to be B, that is 2 only. Okay. Now, after this, moving on to the next question. Project Vani, Karan, recently launched by the Forest Department, seeks to increase the afforestation efforts in the declared wastelands, improve the density of mangrove trees across the coastal landscape, root out invasive alien plants like Senna spectabilis, increase the green cover of India as per the National Forest Policy. Project Vani, Karan. So when we talk about Project Vani, Karan, its purpose is very simple: to root out the presence of invasive alien plant species. Now, invasive alien plant species, when we talk about species such as Senna spectabilis, now this is not native or endemic to India. This has been introduced into India long back as a ornamental plant. Now, this particular plant, which is the Senna spectabilis, has the ability to grow particularly quickly. It grows very quickly. Okay? Grows very quickly. Now, when it tends to grow very quickly, what it does is it makes the entire region or the entire landscape becomes devoid of sunlight. So the lesser plant species or the plant species which take a larger time to grow, they will not get the required resources. Now, this also consumes a lot of water, consumes significant water, significant amount of water. Okay, that is also something which can be attributed to it. So that is where the local floral species, they are devoid of either the presence of sunlight or the presence of water, and they are stymied in their growth. Now, this kind of population interaction, what is it referred to as? We have different types of population interaction present in the ecosystem. When you have this kind of population interaction, what is the kind of population interaction which is referred to in this kind? It is amensalism. So amensalism is observed, where one of the species is not at all impacted, where the other species, its growth is severely impacted and inhibited. Okay, so amensalism again is something you can keep in mind. Now, with reference to the Batagur Kachuga, recently in news, consider the following statements. It is the freshwater turtle species found in deep flowing rivers in India and Bangladesh. It is the only turtle species which is endemic to India. So here we have to find out which of the statements given above are correct. So freshwater turtle species found in deep flowing rivers in India, Bangladesh, this is going to be the correct statement. Okay, it is a freshwater species found in the rivers Ganga, Brahmaputra flowing in this area. It is the only turtle species which is endemic to India. This is going to be incorrect. So the correct answer in this case is going to be A, that is one only. Batagur Kachuga, why it is in news is because of the submission of a kind of the entire proposal to include this in Appendix 2 of CITES and regulate its trade, the illegal trade, which is impacting the presence of this particular turtle species. So here you have to understand it is one of the 24 species of turtles which are very endemic to India only. Okay, so it is not the only turtle species endemic to India, and it is characterized by very bright colors such as red, yellow, white, blue, and that is something which is observed in the necks of the male species of this turtle. It is a freshwater turtle species and it has got a terrestrial nesting site. Again, one thing which needs to be looked into. It has got a terrestrial nesting site native to India, Bangladesh and Nepal. Now it also occurs in the Ganga as well as in the Brahmaputra basin. In both these areas you'll find this. Why in news? To be included in Appendix 2. Of CITES. Okay, now here after this consider the following statements with regards to the recently notified Kadavur Slender Loris Sanctuary. It is the first Slender Loris Sanctuary of the country. Slender loris are natural predators of pests and hence are beneficial to farmers. It is declared as per the provisions of Wildlife Act 1972. Vikas, difference between sky glow glare. See, understand, sky glow basically is that the light which is emitted by the anthropogenic sources, let's say human habitations, etc. So every light which is emitted due to that is a part of the sky glow, and that reduces our impact or our ability to observe the atmosphere or the star system and any astronomical observatory which can be carried out, which can be built there, that is impacted by that sky glow. So here Slender Loris Sanctuary, that is the Kadavur Slender Loris Sanctuary, which has been established and opened in Tamil Nadu. It spreads to the neighboring regions of Dindigul, etc. So it is the first Slender Loris Sanctuary of the country. That is going to be correct. They are natural predators of pests. So the small pests that influence or impact the crop production in the farmlands. Now those pests are consumed by this Slender Loris. So that is where you will find that this is a kind of a natural predator and hence beneficial to farmers. Many of the farmers, they are not impacted by the presence of this Slender Loris. And here, why they need significant amount of protection is that they are hunted and poached because of trade. Obviously they form one of the exotic pets in general, so they are illegally traded. At the same time, it is believed that they have got some kind of magical powers or certain kind of witchcraft activities are observed and followed around them. For that also they are hunted. Now special thing about this or this particular species of Slender Loris is its very large eyes and it has got a vestigial tail. The tail is not active. Okay, So it is declared as per the provisions of Wildlife Act, as is the case with any protected area. It has been declared as per the Wildlife Act. So here, which are correct? The answer is D, 1, 2, and 3. All of them are correct. Then, with reference to the Asola Bhati Wildlife Sanctuary recently in news, consider the following statements. The dominant vegetation comprises dry deciduous trees and shrubs. Due to extreme temperatures, reptile species are not to be found in the region. Seed bank initiative has been launched to restore the native vegetation of the region. Which of the statements is or are correct? Now here, Asola Bhati, where is it situated? It is situated in the outskirts of Delhi, along the region of the Aravalli Ridge area. Now there you have significant sighting of leopards which has been observed in the recent past. That is why it is in news. And it is also in news because of the fact that you have got a kind of a seed bank initiative to increase the native vegetation of all the various different plant species which have been lost due to adverse climate. So that is why the seed bank initiative has been launched. So that is why this particular protected area has been in news. So the dominant vegetation comprises dry deciduous trees and shrubs. That is going to be correct. Due to extreme temperature, reptile species are not to be found in this region. This is going to be incorrect. Because reptile species, obviously in the region of Aravallis, you'll find a lot of varieties of reptile species in that area. So that is incorrect. And here dry deciduous and shrubs, if you know the location, you will always be able to get an idea about the total amount of rainfall received. And from that, from the aspect of total amount of rainfall received, you will always have an idea about the vegetation. For example, even in the case of Bandipur, you would find the presence of dry deciduous trees and shrubs. So wherever the rainfall received is around 60, 70, 80 centimeter per year, dry deciduous, shrublands, open forests, that is something which is to be found in that area. All the various different protected areas across the eastern part of the country and the central portion, majority of them will have the dry deciduous. Moist deciduous is restricted only in certain areas across the western parts of the Western Ghats, across some portions of the Tarai belt, some portions of the region of West Bengal, some portions in the area of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and some parts of Odisha. Otherwise, the predominant vegetation across the country is going to be dry deciduous. Various different types of species, when we talk about it tomorrow, various different types of species, especially the big cats if you consider, or even if you consider the elephant population, large amount of these are to be found in dry deciduous and the shrublands. So that is something which has to be kept in mind. Seed bank initiative has been launched to restore the native vegetation. That is going to be correct. So here the correct answer is going to be D. That is 1 and 3 only. Now, Oran landscape in India are associated with which of the following species? Indian wild ass, Malabar civet, Nilgiri tar, and Great Indian bustard. So what do we mean by Oran landscape and why they are in use? That is something you have to understand here. So Oran landscape is associated with the wastelands. So here the correct answer is going to be D, Great Indian bustard. Now why they have been in news recently is because the Supreme Court has asked for the government's report in terms of what is the status in terms of functionality of the reclamation or getting rid of the electricity power lines which are present in the Oran landscape. So Oran landscape is to be found in the region of Rajasthan. Rajasthan. These are the very famous wastelands. Now in these areas you'll find significant population of Great Indian bustard which is endangered, and here in these wastelands you have electricity and electrical lines, power lines. Now they start behaving as one of the biggest inhibitors in terms of the bustard, and many of these bustards, they get trapped in that, and that is where the population has been experiencing a sharp decline as well. So in this case here, the Great Indian Bustard is very relevant for these wastelands. Now, what is the problem in this case is, whenever you have any wasteland which is declared, immediately there is an aspect of reclamation of land, agricultural extension, etc. is carried out. But these are not exactly those lands which are not productive at all. You'll find the presence of certain shrubs, certain amount of vegetation, which is relevant enough for these bustards. But once you carry out the reclamation of the wasteland, we have talked about the aspect of various degraded lands, etc. under Bond challenge, land degradation neutrality. So that is where once you classify this landscape as wasteland, as is being done, immediately the conservation of bustards become a very difficult proposition to achieve, because that is when you will have people coming in, lot of infrastructure building which is happening in the name of reclamation of wasteland, and the bustard population is declining. That is why the local population of that region, they had submitted a petition into the court that please don't declare this region as a wasteland. Okay? Now, then these are your Oran landscapes in general. Now, after that, which of the following options correctly describes Mesotropis pellita recently in the news? So, which of these describes Mesotropis pellita? So here, it is an invasive species found in Shola grasslands. It is a critically endangered shrub known for its medicinal properties. It is a weed which adversely impacts sugarcane plantations. It is a type of plankton known for increasing dissolved oxygen levels in water. So which of this correctly describes Mesotropis pellita? So here, when we talk about this particular plant species, this has been in news because this is particularly in scarce quantity. There is a lot of smuggling which is being carried out. This is a herb which is found in the Himalayan mountain ranges. So that is where it is a critically endangered shrub. It has been designated as critically endangered by IUCN. And why it has been designated so? Because of its utility. It has got a significant amount of antioxidant property associated with it. Significant amount of antioxidant property is associated with it, and also you will have the issues of, let's say, bronchial infection, lung infection, etc. They can be treated by this particular shrub. So utility is quite significant. Okay, so that is basically the aspect of this particular question. This is in relevance in news for this year, so it is again relevant. Now again, for the final time, this completes the questions for today's session. For the final time, I would like to talk again about the Biosphere Reserve, where we talked about the dugong population. Again, I would issue a clarification that Gulf of Mannar can also be taken as the correct answer in that case. So I hope that assuages all the various anxieties that you have had, and I hope that the session has been meaningful and productive enough. Now tomorrow we meet again for the final time, where tomorrow we shall be picking up the remaining amount of questions, the remainder questions which are present in the portion of Environment Ecology. We shall be picking up few of the areas of pollution, few of the areas of species in news, and we shall be focusing upon those species and the regions where they are found. So till tomorrow, take care of yourself. Have a good time. Goodbye. Thank you.